Namaste, I'm Rangaraju, Executive Director of Ganges Valley School. Welcome to Samvadh, a conversation with Ms. Aarti Rajaratnam, a well-known psychologist, author and an innovative curriculum and educational consultant. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I would like to ask you something about what we get from a lot of parents and what we have observed over a period of time. There are two kinds of parents. One is very indulgent and one is somebody who is, you can say, somebody like a tiger mom who wants their children in many activities, many classes. What is the right thing? How do we strike a balance between these two? How much push is right? How much, to let be as is right? What is the right balance, ma'am?
Like you rightly said, there are these extremes in parenting, and we call one group the snowplow parent, who's always endeavoring to remove all obstacles from the child's life. In fact, you'll see them coming and telling teachers, if he doesn't do it, don't tell him, I'll come and take the notes for him, I'll come and do this for him. That parent. And then of course, like you mentioned, the tiger mom or the helicopter parent sometimes, where they're overprotective and always looking at the child through the lens. Both come from parental anxiety. Now, we may need to understand the root cause of it before we address the issue. As a parent, naturally, I want to do what is best for my child. I want to, sort of protect them from the big bad world, as we call it. Sometimes, I want to make sure that they don't get hurt because I have not yet resolved some hurt within me and things like that. So, when there are so many unresolved issues in our own parenting, it may reflect in the way I raise my child. And sometimes it could also be influences from the society where, I'm in a culture where every parent is pushing the child towards a particular class. All children but mine are probably taking a particular course and things like that. So it is definitely quite challenging. So in that sense, these extremes of parenting need to, of course, reach a balance. But before that, we may need to also understand that no parent is perfect. We don't have it all figured out, and there's no formula, because if there was a formula, we wouldn't have the discussion. We would just probably give out these formulas to parents saying, this is how you'll strike a balance.
You could have given a blueprint. I wish parenting came with a blueprint,
a manual
probably how to do.
In fact, most parents, and especially the parents that I've interacted with, have become better parents on hindsight. It's never the parent who had it all chalked out that was able to do it. And I'm sure that, parents who have two children will tell you that, they had a totally different experience with one child, and, night and day difference when they were raising another child. The same methods didn't work here or there, which is why it's
also
such a...
probably, with the first child, you're younger, less wisdom, less experience, and with the second child you probably have more experience, more wisdom, so you probably know how to deal with it better.
Probably. And I also there, ma'am, would add, there's also spontaneity with the first child. You're willing to try many more things when you're working with the first child, but with the second child, you already have these methods and you want them to sort of work. The openness sort of goes down a little bit with the second child. So I think there are many factors that go into it. But if you also see, ma'am, there is the second type of parent, and I've seen them because I work with early years so much. First few years of the child's life, they sort of indulge. They let them have anything, have their way for everything. If he doesn't eat this, I'll make something else for him. Or, if they don't want to do their homework, I'll complete it for them. And they've not set any routines, any habits. And suddenly in, say, grade 5 or grade 6, jump in and say, he doesn't know this, she doesn't do this, and things like that. And then, pressurize the child. So both forms of these extremes can be detrimental, because the child does not have a stable or a predictable blueprint within which they can explore opportunities, which is why it becomes a big problem.
So nowadays we see on TV and various platforms, there are children who are just 2 or 3 years old who are able to rattle out all the capitals, various things. Does this put pressure on other parents when they start comparing their children with all these prodigy kind of children?
Again here, it's not pressurizing the other parents, though it does. I'm more concerned about the pressure that the child is under to constantly perform like this. And this word prodigy is misunderstood, because in that sense, a prodigy is somebody who has that natural ability. So there are a lot of examples. I have a beautiful example of Roger Federer and Tiger Woods. And if I could quote that, Federer, apparently his parents were sport teachers, if I'm not mistaken. So they allowed him to play any sport he wanted. So all through school he tried team games, he played. Tennis was never his first sport. It was only much later in life that he took to tennis. Whereas Tiger Woods, they considered him this prodigy. And then right from, I think when he was about 18 months or 2 years or something, he had his first set of golf clubs and he started practicing, and very intense kind of practice. And the burnout for Tiger Woods was much earlier than Federer. Federer, in fact, was able to overcome these things very beautifully. He didn't ever go in for a burnout, and you can see his consistent performance, really enjoying his performance. You never see him, lose it in a match, or have that kind of moment where he's not able to regulate his emotions. So in that sense, I'm quoting this example with a very specific message for parents. It's important for children to have a range of experiences, and that range of experiences gives them skills for life. Only expertise in one field may not.
So when you say range of experiences, do we as parents understand that correctly? That means that we put them number of activities and causing a burnout or confusion to the child?
And again, ma'am, here there's a very relevant point you brought in, because when I said range of experiences, a parent who's attuned with the child's needs may be able to understand that this is saturation point. My child may not be able to continue this music lesson for more than this period of time. Like there are some children who can go up to the 8 levels in an exam and manage, and then there are children who just learn that instrument 2 songs and that's it. They don't want to do further. So range of experience does not mean sending children for certification based classes. This culture where the moment I enroll a child in a class, they have to finish this level, and then you'll see these people putting these certificates all over social media sometimes. I call it very shameful. I know that's because I find it very amusing, but I'm sure a lot of people find it good for themselves. But when I'm always seeking external validation, when my skill is not something that I'm enjoying, but somebody else is validating.
If I'm dependent on somebody else's validation or appreciation, I kind of get used to it, and then even in later life, that only if somebody validates or appreciates, I find value towards.
Yes, ma'am. In fact, Western cultures, which are traditionally task driven, were the ones that started this culture of certifying everything. Like if a child is playing well, then they have a certificate for that. If the child is narrating a story, then there's a certificate for that. I don't know, in my childhood we would just narrate stories and people would be amused by it, and that's about it. There was no certification, there was no photograph, there was no social media mention, there was no hashtag for it. But life was actually quite beautiful in that sense, because you narrated a story because you enjoyed narrating that story. You were not forced to perform. So yes, like you mentioned rightly, these people grow on to become people who have to be constantly appreciated in teams, and if they're not appreciated, they lose their drive to work and things like that. In the long run, it's a very dysfunctional pattern where I don't know how to find value in me. I will always find value only through something or through someone. That becomes a dangerous pattern for sure.
Ma'am, could you please explain further on burnout, especially in India? We have children in certain categories or certain professions. They start involving children in their own business at a very, very early age. So what is burnout and how does that play out later in life? How does it affect these kind of children who are very performance driven, and again, like you said earlier, recognition from outside drives their performance as well? So how does burnout relate to this?
So there is a beautiful quote, and I probably have to paraphrase because I don't remember it offhand. It says, "It's only the things that you do half-heartedly that you will feel stress from. What you do wholeheartedly, you will not experience stress." And burnout in that sense is a cumulative, the impact of a cumulative set of activities that I've indulged in without being in tune with myself. In that sense, I could go through the 5 stages of stress for somebody who is performance driven. Now, all of us need a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of apprehension when we are performing. For example, while we're making this video, there is a little bit of apprehension because I want to put out the right content. I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to, so there is that little bit of a anxiety which is actually protective in nature. I require this to be able to perform well, and this anxiety can make me feel more in touch with myself because it'll prevent me from being complacent, from being arrogant, and those kind of things. So every emotion is good in that sense. But this first level of stress, all of us need to have, and we call it the U stress, EU stress. U stress is good stress, meaning I require it to be able to perform well. And all of us experience it in different ways. Some people as a little bit of anxiety, some people come across as very excited, some of them become very humorous, but it's just the body's way of finding that balance. And then once the task is over, the anxiety is gone and you can have a great, a balance. The second stage of stress, in the absence of a stressor, I'm experiencing that anxiety or that emotion that I'm not able to balance. So we're not recording. I'm having a natural conversation with you and I'm really anxious. Then that becomes a challenge. So this is, if you take it in the educational setting, this is the child who during the exams experiences a little bit of anxiety, manages to do well, and then after that forgets. But then there is no exam, no test, no evaluation, but the child is always anxious about coming to school. That is the second stage of stress, and we call that the psychological stress. The third stage of stress is where the body begins to take on the stress. So I've tried telling my parents I'm very anxious going to school, I'm not feeling too good, and the parent says, no, what have you experienced in life, get on with it, go to school, you have to become this, you have to join this institution, kind of thing, and that pressure is there.
Parent is dismissive about
the emotion, yes.
Then you suppress it, and that makes...
Actually, it's not even suppression initially, it's the repression, because difference between suppression and repression I consciously decide not to experience. Repression is because I've received these messages that it's not acceptable here. And then it goes much deeper and it becomes these tension headaches, and for young children it'll be the stomach pain, the flitting and fleeting stomach pains where you ask them where is it hurting, first they'll show you the spleen, then they'll show you the liver, because they're just feeling uncomfortable and the emotion is not being understood. The psychological stress, because in cultures like the Indian culture where we tend to dismiss emotional symptoms, but we will accept or even go to the extent of doing a lot of treatment for a physical symptom, the psychological stress becomes physiological, where the body begins to take on the stress. So it'll be, for the older age groups, it'll start as neck pain, a little bit of hypertension that's not diagnosed, the borderline diabetic as they would call them. So there is a stress component, and the doctors will tell you, start exercising, do yoga, do meditation. But what they're really trying to say is get in touch with yourself. And for young children, these will be aches and pains. There will be school refusal to a great extent. You will see these children having writer's cramp, unable to write during the exam, clammy palms, those kind of things. Then this becomes physiological deterioration where there's no treatment.
I see.
And then the fifth stage, which is the burnout. In burnout, I lose the will to perform, to do anything. There's this sense of silent resignation where nothing that gave me joy before feels good anymore.
Thank you so much, ma'am.